In a small, bustling town in southeastern Nigeria, there lived a wealthy man named Uche Chijioke. Uche was known for his vast wealth and influence, with a sprawling estate filled with luxurious cars, expensive clothing, and servants who attended to his every need. His business empire had risen rapidly in a few years, and his mansion stood as a testament to his success. But beneath his extravagant lifestyle, Uche carried a dark secret, one that he believed was the key to his wealth. For years, rumors had swirled around Uche's mysterious rise to power. While people admired him for his business acumen, others whispered about his late-night activities and the strange rituals that seemed to accompany his fortune. In the dead of night, Uche would disappear into the shadows of his mansion, only to return in the early hours of the morning, his eyes bloodshot, his demeanor disheveled. No one knew where he went, but everyone noticed the peculiar presence of certain women in his life. These women were unlike the usual women that a wealthy man would keep close. They were often seen wandering the streets in tattered clothes, their eyes wide, their behavior erratic. Some of them would scream incoherently at passers-by, while others would sit in a trance-like state, muttering things no one could understand. They were known in the town as mad women, women whose minds had been lost to the world. What people didn't know was that Uche had found a way to manipulate these women into a sinister ritual. He had learned of an ancient practice passed down through generations in his family, one that promised unimaginable wealth, but at a terrible cost. The ritual, he was told, could only be performed during the dark of the moon, with the woman's mind broken and her spirit vulnerable. The more madness she exhibited, the more powerful the ritual became. So, every month, Uche would seek out these women, whose minds had been shattered by life's tragedies. He would seduce them, using his charm to bring them into his mansion, where the ritual would take place. There, they would be led into a chamber filled with strange symbols, flickering candles, and the scent of burning incense. Uche would perform an elaborate incantation, mixing blood and herbs, and sometimes, his own sacrifice would be required. The madness in the women's eyes was believed to fool the magic, unlocking powers that would bring wealth, success, and dominance. But the cost was high. Each time, Uche felt the weight of his actions on his soul. The women, after the ritual, would slip even further into madness, their bodies and minds drained, left to wander the streets as shadows of their former selves. Some say Uche's conscience weighed heavily on him, but the desire for more riches, more influence, and more power kept him going. The town could never understand the darkness that dwelled within him, and so, they marveled at his continued success. One fateful night, as Uche prepared for the ritual with yet another woman, a new twist to his dark practice began to unfold. This time, the woman he chose, Edeora, was different. She was not like the others he had used before. She was strong-willed, intelligent, and her madness was not as easily manipulated. When Uche tried to seduce her and lure her into the ritual, she resisted in a way no one had before. Edeora had been abandoned by her family when she was young, and though she had been through unimaginable suffering, she had found a way to survive. Her sharp mind and resilience had not been completely consumed by the madness, and she was aware of the sinister ritual that Uche sought to perform on her. At first, Uche did not see her resistance as a threat. He believed that he could break her, as he had done to so many others before. But Edeora had other plans. As the days passed, Uche grew more and more frustrated. Edeora's resistance was unlike any he had ever encountered. Unlike the others, who had fallen into his charms, Edeora was aware of what he was doing, and her defiance only seemed to grow stronger. Uche had always believed that the women who entered his mansion were victims, easily manipulated, weak in mind, and broken in spirit. But Edeora was different. She seemed to have a quiet, yet powerful strength that unnerved him. The night of the ritual finally arrived, and Uche knew he had to act swiftly. He couldn't afford to let Edeora slip away, not when she was so close to fulfilling his desires. His mansion was ready, the chamber prepared, and the incantation memorized. He had everything set, but there was a flicker of doubt in his heart, something he hadn't felt in years. Edeora, on the other hand, had been preparing too. She had been aware of Uche's intentions from the moment she stepped foot into his mansion. Though she had been lured by his promises of wealth and protection, something inside her had always told her to watch him carefully. She had learned of the dark ritual through whispers in the streets, stories that had been passed down by the few survivors who had once been part of Uche's twisted cycle. Eudora wasn't mad. She had simply suffered, like many others, but in her suffering, she had learned to sharpen her instincts. She knew what she had to do. That night, Uche entered the chamber, his robes flowing behind him, his face set in a determined expression. He walked toward Eudora, who was seated at the center of the room, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity he hadn't expected. "Tonight, you will give me everything I desire, Eudora," Uche said, his voice low, almost hypnotic. "You will be the final piece that will elevate me beyond anything I've ever imagined." But Eudora didn't flinch. She stood up slowly, her voice steady and firm. "No, Uche. You don't understand. I've been through too much to be another pawn in your game. The power you seek isn't something you can take. It's something you have to earn." Uche laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think you can stop me? I've made a fortune from this ritual. You are nothing but a tool to my success, Eudora. And when you're gone, no one will remember your name. But I will become a god." Eudora's eyes flashed with a knowing glint. "You're already lost, Uche," she whispered. "You don't even see it. The madness you feed off, the women you exploit, it's slowly consuming you. You think you're powerful, but you've already given up your soul." Uche's smirk faltered for a moment, and in that fleeting moment of hesitation, Eudora seized the opportunity. With a sudden, forceful movement, she grabbed a small vial from the table beside her and poured its contents into the burning incense. A thick, green smoke began to billow, and the air grew heavy with an unnatural weight. "What is this?" Uche demanded, panic creeping into his voice as the smoke swirled around him. His skin began to prickle, and his chest tightened as if something was squeezing the life out of him. "I told you," Eudora said, her voice no longer trembling, but resolute. "The power you seek cannot be taken by force. It must be earned through sacrifice. But tonight, you will sacrifice your own power." Uche staggered back, clutching his chest as his body trembled uncontrollably. The ritual was supposed to work in his favor, but instead, it was turning against him. The symbols on the walls of the chamber began to glow faintly, the flickering candles casting eerie shadows that danced like ghosts. The ritual was backfiring, and the forces he had so carefully manipulated were now turning on him. Eudora stepped forward, her face calm and unreadable. "You've used and discarded people like they were nothing. But you didn't realize that every soul you've drained is waiting for you, waiting to take back what you've stolen." The chamber grew colder, and the once manic laughter of Uche was replaced by a low, guttural sound of something much darker. The walls seemed to close in, the floor trembling beneath his feet. Suddenly, the door to the chamber burst open, and figures clad in white appeared, their faces hidden by veils. They moved with a grace that seemed otherworldly, their eyes fixed on Uche with an intensity that could pierce through the soul. These were the women, those who had once been broken by Uche, but whose spirits had not been entirely consumed. They were the ones he had used for his rituals, and now they had come back to reclaim what was taken. Uche tried to run, but the smoke around him thickened, trapping him in a suffocating grip. "No. This is not how it's supposed to be," he screamed, his voice cracking with fear. "You can't stop me. I am Uche Chidiok. I am untouchable." But Eudora was unshaken. She had known this moment would come. The ritual wasn't about power, it was about balance. The women who had been sacrificed would no longer remain in the shadows. They had come to reclaim their dignity, their minds, and their voices. As Uche struggled in vain, the figures approached him, their hands raised in silent unison. And then, everything went black. The room was silent, save for the faint crackle of the candles that still burned in the corners. Uche's body lay motionless on the cold stone floor, his once proud form now a lifeless shell. The women who had once been lost to madness now stood in a circle around him, their eyes glinting with quiet strength, their movements soaring. They were no longer the broken creatures Uche had manipulated. The ritual had shifted, and they had reclaimed what was theirs. Eudora stood at the center of the circle, watching with steady eyes. She had not been part of the ritual in the way Uche had planned, but she had unknowingly set it into motion. The green smoke had not only been meant to disorient Uche, it had also connected them, those who had been victims of his cruel rites, to the very spirits he had tried to control. The power was shifting, and it was no longer in Uche's hands. As the last remnants of the smoke dissipated, one of the women, a figure with long, wild hair and an intense, almost otherworldly presence, stepped forward. Her name was Nina, and she was the first of Uche's victims, the one whose mind had been most shattered by the rituals. Yet, unlike the others, Nina had always held onto a sliver of her past, of her identity. She had been waiting for the moment to regain control, and now she was whole again. She knelt beside Uche's still form, her hands hovering over him as though in prayer. "He is not dead, yet he is not alive," Nina whispered, her voice low and melodic. "He has crossed the threshold. Now, the true price will be paid." Eudora stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "What does that mean? What happens to him now?" Nina's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, Eudora felt an eerie calm wash over her. The price of his actions is not something simple. He sought power, but he never understood that true power cannot be bought. It must be earned through compassion, sacrifice, and respect for life. Uche thought he could play with souls, but now, his own soul is trapped between two worlds. The air seemed to grow heavier with each word spoken, and Eudora felt a shiver down her spine. She had been a part of something much larger than herself, a cycle of destruction that had spanned generations. The ritual had not just been about Uche's rise to power, it was a part of a long-standing darkness, one that had fed off the desperation and suffering of countless souls. "What happens to him now?" Eudora repeated, her voice more urgent. Nina stood up slowly, her expression grave. "We will give him a chance to atone. If he refuses, the spirits will claim him. But if he seeks redemption, he will have to face the truth of his own darkness. The madness that consumed these women, the madness he fed off, has also begun to work within him. Now, he must find his way back, or he will be lost forever." Eudora's heart raced as she looked down at Uche, whose chest now rose and fell with shallow breaths. He was alive, but only barely. The spirits surrounding him were not of this world, they were the women he had exploited, and now, they were the ones with the power. Can he really change? Eudora asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Nina's eyes softened. Change is always possible, but it requires a willingness to face one's deeper sins. Uche must be stripped of his arrogance, his greed, and his cruelty. Only then can he begin to heal the wounds he has caused. But that choice is his alone. For a long while, the room was silent again, the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. The women, now standing together in quiet unity, seemed to hold a shared understanding. They had lived through the worst of what Uche had put them through, but now they were free. And yet, they were not vengeful, they simply wanted justice, redemption for Uche, if he was willing to fight for it. Eudora knelt down beside Uche, her hand hovering above his, as though waiting for him to awaken from the trance of his own making. Slowly, his eyes flickered open, the remnants of the ritual's dark power still clouding his vision. For a moment, he did not recognize the faces around him, his mind was too filled with confusion and fear. But when his gaze met Eudora's, something stirred within him. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. His eyes were wide with terror, and for the first time, there was a hint of remorse in them. Eudora did not speak immediately. She let the silence stretch between them, allowing the weight of his question to settle. It was a question he had never truly asked himself before, one that could not be answered easily. "You've hurt many people, Uche," she finally said, her voice calm but firm. "But it's not too late for you to change. If you want redemption, you must seek it. The power you've been chasing, it's hollow. You know that now?" Uche closed his eyes, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the floor. He had lived for so long in the illusion of control, in the belief that wealth and power were the only things that mattered. But now, with the spirits of the women surrounding him, with Adora's words ringing in his ears, he realized that everything he had built was fragile. He had sacrificed his soul for nothing. I want to change, Uche whispered, his voice raw with emotion. But how? How do I begin? The women circled around him once more, their eyes filled with a strange, otherworldly compassion. Nina stepped forward again, her voice soft yet commanding. You must face the consequences of your actions, Uche. You must undo the harm you have done, not just to the women you used, but to the very fabric of the world you have built. Only then can you begin to heal. Uche looked up at her, his eyes filled with fear, but also with a flicker of hope. It would not be easy, he knew that now. But if he truly sought redemption, the path would be long and difficult. The ritual had not only stripped him of his power, it had revealed to him the depth of his own depravity. But as he looked at the women who had once been victims, he realized that they, too, had found a way to rise from the ashes of their suffering. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could do the same. Uche's eyes filled with a new understanding as the words of Nina and Edora sank deep into his soul. The weight of the past, the lives he had broken, and the destruction he had caused came crashing down on him, but he knew there was no going back. If he truly wanted redemption, it would begin with undoing the harm he had caused. Nina, who had been silent for a moment, spoke again, her voice now softened by something akin to pity. Redemption is not a quick path, Uche. It requires the courage to face your darkest truths and the humility to make amends. For every soul you have sacrificed, you must find a way to heal. That is the true price of power, understanding that it is not about control, but about lifting others up. Uche nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of her words. He had sought wealth, influence, and dominance, but in the process, he had lost himself. He had treated the people around him as mere stepping stones, never once pausing to consider the cost of his ambition. But now, as he lay on the cold stone floor, surrounded by the very women he had once exploited, he realized the most important truth of all: true power comes from love, respect, and the ability to lift others, not from using them for one's own gain. Edora, who had been observing him with steady eyes, added her voice, quiet but firm. You have hurt many, Uche. But now it's time to prove that you can change. Start by helping those you've wronged. Seek out the women you've used, restore their dignity, and make amends for the pain you've caused. Only then will you understand the power of true redemption. Uche's heart ached as he thought of the countless women he had abused, used for his own selfish desires. He could feel their suffering, their brokenness, and for the first time, he genuinely regretted his actions. He wanted to make it right. But where would he begin? The women, now standing together as one, looked down at him with a mixture of sympathy and caution. They had been victims, but they had also found strength in one another. Their unity had freed them from Uche's control, and now, they were ready to move on with their lives. It was Uche's turn to find his own path to freedom. As the night drew to a close and the chamber began to empty, Uche stood up, unsteady at first, but resolute. The spirits of the women, their faces now calm and peaceful, faded into the shadows, their presence no longer a threat. They had given him a chance, a gift he did not deserve, but one he would not squander. Edora gave him one final look before turning to leave. You will have to face your past, Uche, she said softly. But it's not too late. You can change. You can make it right. As the last of the women exited the room, Uche was left alone in the silence. The mansion that had once been a symbol of his wealth now felt cold and empty. He understood now that true wealth was not in gold or land, but in the lives he had touched. He had been given a second chance, but it would not be easy. The road to redemption was long and fraught with hardship, but it was the only road that mattered now. The next morning, Uche took his first step on that road. He began by reaching out to the women whose lives he had destroyed. He went to the streets where they wandered, lost in madness, and offered them help. He provided them with shelter, treatment, and a chance to rebuild their lives. Slowly, he made amends for his wrongs, one small act of kindness at a time. Over time, Uche learned that redemption wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. It was not a reward to be claimed, but a lifelong commitment to living differently, to serving others, and to righting the wrongs of the past. He dedicated himself to helping those who had suffered under his control and worked tirelessly to dismantle the dark web of power that had once ensnared him. Years passed, and Uche became known not for his wealth or his power, but for his transformation. He was no longer the man who had used others for his gain. Instead, he became a champion for those who had been marginalized and forgotten. His wealth, though still considerable, was no longer the measure of his success. His true wealth lay in the lives he touched, the healing he facilitated, and the redemption he had fought for. The moral of Uche's story is simple yet profound. True power does not lie in the ability to control or dominate others, but in the capacity to lift them up. True success is not measured by wealth or influence, but by the impact we have on the lives of those around us. The road to redemption may be long and difficult, but it is always worth traveling, for it is through humility, sacrifice, and the willingness to make amends that we find the greatest freedom. In the end, Uche realized that he had been given a second chance, not because he deserved it, but because he had the opportunity to change. And change he did, for the betterment of both himself and the world around him. If you find this story interesting, kindly like and subscribe.